Hey, let's chat about the Vikings like we're spilling some juicy gossip. And trust me, this story is a wild ride all the way to the end. We usually picture them as tough raiders and warriors, right? But here's the thing that hardly anyone talks about. What happened after the fighting stopped? When the clash of axes quieted down and the shield walls broke apart, that's when the real nightmare kicked in. Not for the guys lying lifeless on the ground, though. Their pain was over. No, it was their wives, their daughters, and every woman who survived the raid who faced something way worse. What the Vikings did to them made death look like a kindness, believe me. You might think you get how cruel the Vikings could be, but the sagas barely hint at what came next. If you're into the real history from the Viking and Norse times, hit that subscribe button. It helps us keep this going. Drop a comment and let us know which city you're watching from, okay? All this stuff comes straight from sources like Ibn Fedlin's eyewitness accounts to the archaeological digs at Dublin's slave markets. Now back to the story. The monastery at Commicknoe fell to Thorgils and his fleet, and 43 monks were cut down while defending the altar. The chronicler tells about the slaughter, then goes quiet about what happened to the women. But the evidence is still there. The chains. Excavations at Dublin's Wood Quay found the remains of a slave market, with iron shackles made for women's wrists, ankle rings tiny enough for kids, and storage buildings meant for human cargo. Dublin's Norsemen didn't just grab gold and silver, oh no, they took bodies too. A captured wife turned into a commodity, not a person. In the markets, the price was figured out cold and clear. 20 silver for a young woman, 15 for a mom, 10 for one hurt during capture. These numbers are carved in runic inscriptions in Schleswig, like receipts in stone. Yet getting sold was sometimes the best luck they could hope for. In 862, the Vikings stormed the settlement of Port Morrow. In the Irish annals note 47 warriors killed, but they say nothing about the 53 women taken from the longhouses. Soil tests from nearby bogs fill in the blanks. 23 female bodies, all with signs of deliberate violence. These deaths weren't messy or random. The wounds had patterns, like skulls cracked from behind, forearms smashed from fighting back, ribs broken by long attacks. These were battle injuries. Nope. They were executions done days after the raid, after decisions were made. The pattern shows up again. In 871, the great heathen army captured Reading, and chroniclers mention King Ethelred's defeat, but skip the royal women's fate. Digs at the old Saxon palace found stones stained with iron oxide, blood traces, enough for dozens of deaths. Norse war culture had strict laws, you know? A slain warrior's wife became the killer's legal property, not as a servant, but as a forced wife. The Old Norse word was kona, meaning owned woman, property that breathes. Icelandic law codes lay out the ritual. The captor had to declare ownership in front of witnesses. The woman had no choice, no voice, no way out. The marriage was legal, and any kids born were legit too. The assault wasn't just okay, it was written into law. The Gragas law codes were clear. You had to claim her within 3 days of capture or rivals could challenge it. Women were fought over like cattle, and forced marriage wasn't even the worst thing that could happen. In 878, Norse raiders destroyed the monastery at Bangor, and the annals record its wipeout, but not the ritual that followed. Burn layers at similar spots tell the real story. Bone pieces from women arranged in careful patterns. Norse burial rites demanded sacrifice. When a warrior died, his horses, weapons, and women went too. Ibn Fedlin describes a scene on the Volga in 921, the ritual taking and killing of a slave girl at her master's funeral. Archaeology shows it wasn't a one-off. Boat burials across Scandinavia have female skeletons with strangulation marks, drug traces and teeth, proof they were calmed with henbane before death. They went to the pyre dazed, hallucinating, compliant. Maybe that eased the terror, or maybe it made it worse. By 907, the great army wintered at Tetford, and chroniclers talk about cattle stolen and churches burned, but nothing about the camp's inside. The rubbish heaps tell it instead: infant bones, dozens with blunt force trauma. Not stillbirths, murders. Viking law was strict. If the mom was a slave, the kid was too. If the kid couldn't work, it was killed. Brutal economics, huh? The Doomsday Book later shows this was still a thing under the Normans. Population studies in Yorkshire show gaps right where Norse settlements were. The bones at Repton back it up. The Great Army's camp from 873 to 874 had 249 skeletons, only 63 women. Women don't just vanish unless they're taken away. Isotope tests on the female remains prove they weren't locals, but captives brought from Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. The ones in graves were the lucky ones, dead from childbirth or sickness. The rest vanished into the slave routes. Viking Dublin wasn't just a port, it was a big hub for human trafficking. Weekly ships brought fresh captives.
Hey, let's keep the gossip going about the Vikings. And oh boy, this part's a real shocker. Women got sorted by age. The young ones were sent to Norse farms as breeding stock. The older ones got shipped east to the Islamic slave markets along the Russian rivers. Dendrochronology, the study of tree rings on Dublin's waterfront posts, tells us a story. Continuous rebuilding from 841 to 970, more than 60 years of steady growth. That growth wasn't for fishing or trading furs. Nope, it was for something way darker. The slave markets were booming. Each new dock meant more space for ships, more storage for human cargo. The warehouses themselves spill the tea. Foundations built of stone designed to hold up to 200 captives at once. Drainage channels carved into the floors weren't for stormwater, but for human waste. These weren't quick pens to hold prisoners before transport. They were long-term storage spots, like human stockrooms. Arabic chroniclers from the 9th century chatted about Viking slave caravans that reached all the way to Baghdad. The women fetched top prices in those eastern markets. Pale-skinned ladies from Germanic and Celtic lands were treated like rare treasures, displayed like exotic goods. The Vikings knew their buyers and supplied the trade with ruthless efficiency. If you love this kind of documented Viking and Norse history, don't forget to subscribe. It helps us out. The main eastern slave route twisted through Novgorod and Kiev, stretching over 1,000 miles along the Dnieper River. Rune-carved ship manifests have been found, listing slaves right next to amber and furs. The figures are chilling, about 20 women per ship, the usual load. But captivity wasn't the worst thing a woman could face. Oh no. It wasn't being sold, it wasn't forced marriage, and it wasn't even ritual sacrifice. The scariest fate waited for the women who dared to resist. In 914, Irish forces managed to retake Dublin from Norse control, and the Annals of the Four Masters describe the triumph, the city freed, the Vikings driven out. But the records stay quiet about what was found outside the walls. Archaeology has since filled in the blanks. Excavations revealed punishment pits, stone-lined holes meant for a slow death. Inside were skeletons with special injuries, legs broken so escape was impossible, arms shattered to stop suicide. These women weren't killed fast. They were kept alive to suffer. Each pit was 6 feet deep and 3 feet across, too small to lie flat, too shallow to stand upright. The victims died crouched in agony, death creeping over days, sometimes weeks. Viking law codes back this up. Any slave woman who harmed or killed her master was to be buried alive, but it wasn't a quick burial. The pit was shallow enough for air, but too deep to escape. They died of thirst, cold, or exhaustion. Archaeological soil analysis from Dublin's execution grounds proves it. Decomposition layers show a long death, not a fast burial. Some pits had sharp stones to tear flesh, others had standing water to drown them slowly. The goal wasn't just death, it was long agony, a lesson for others. Captives were forced to watch, learning exactly what defiance would bring. By 919, Norwegian King Harald Fairhair took control, and the civil wars among the Norse ended. Expansion slowed down, but the slave economy didn't vanish. It got more organized. With set trade routes came reliability. Captives could now be delivered on predictable schedules. Merchants promised delivery dates for people like they were livestock. Byzantine trade records kept the details. The Rus-Byzantine Treaty of 944 even lists slave prices by category. Young women got the highest rates, pregnant women sold cheaper, and kids under 10 were almost worthless. The market had rules, calculations, and steady supply chains. By 937, the last big Viking raid on Ireland ended at the Battle of Brunumbra. 5 kingdoms united to beat the Norse invasion. The win was huge, but what they found in the baggage train was even more telling: portable breeding pens. These weren't rough cages, but smartly built frameworks, iron fittings and wooden structures made to hold humans during long marches or transport. Chains sized for kids, modular sections that could be put together into bigger compounds or taken apart for quick moves. They were like mobile slave markets traveling with the army itself. Each pen held a dozen adults or 20 kids. Iron rings in the wood anchored chains in place, and wear patterns show they were used all the time. This wasn't just random war brutality. It was a planned system built into the logistics of campaigning.
For the Vikings, war wasn't only about conquest or plunder, it was about harvesting people. The wives and daughters of defeated warriors were not just collateral damage, they were the main target. They were living resources to be grabbed, processed, and handed out. Archaeological surveys of Viking towns prove it. Every big settlement had holding pens, every harbor had processing spots. The setup was everywhere, woven into daily life, hidden in plain sight. In 944, Eric Bloodaxe fell at Steinbom with...
Hey, let's keep the gossip flowing about the Vikings. And guess what? His death marked the end of the last Viking kingdom in England. But the slavery networks didn't just vanish. Oh no, they got absorbed. Christian rulers took over the setup and gave it a new name. Records from monasteries talk about a big rise in indentured servants right after the Viking defeats, and these weren't voluntary deals, trust me. They were the same women, the same captives, just with a different label. Slaves, rebranded for Christian markets. In 1066, Harold Hardrada died at Stamford Bridge, which was like the end of the Viking Age in England, but archaeology spills the tea the chronicles miss. Mass graves of women, dated exactly to those Viking defeat years, show up. These ladies weren't killed in raids, nope, they were executed, eliminated, with evidence wiped out. The reason gets clear at Repton. A mass grave sealed in 986 was recently dug up, holding 236 bodies, all female, each with signs of deliberate killing, blunt force trauma, strangulation, poisoning. But isotope testing drops a shocker. These weren't captives, they were Norse-born women. The grave lines up with a time when Viking power in England was crumbling and Norse towns were falling. The women buried there weren't enemy prisoners. They were the Vikings' own wives and daughters. Why, you ask? Because the men knew. They knew exactly what awaited captured women. They'd done it themselves for generations. So, facing defeat, they turned those same tricks inward, killing their own families before they could be taken. Soil cores from the Repton site show the killings dragged on over several days, not a rushed mess. It was organized extermination. Fathers ended their daughters' lives, husbands executed their wives, a grim mirror of the terror they once spread. The chronicles stay quiet, the sagas don't mention it, but the bones tell the tale. And one final detail makes it stick. Carved into one skull was a runic inscription, 3 words in Old Norse, "I'm better this way." During that mass execution, someone paused to carve a message into bone, like a justification. Even in the slaughter, they needed to feel right.
The skull belonged to a girl, no older than 12 or 14. Isotope analysis proves she was born in Norway, brought to England as a kid, and killed by her own people to avoid capture. The carving was done after death, as if to explain to her or themselves why it happened.
The reality is this. Viking sexual violence wasn't random, and it wasn't just about raids. Oh no, it was baked into their legal system. The Gregis codes from Iceland spell it out. A man claiming a woman had to announce it publicly with at least 3 witnesses there. Her resistance didn't matter, her consent didn't count. If she took her own life to escape, the captor could legally demand compensation from her family. Suicide wasn't seen as freedom, it was theft of property. The fine was 40 silver marks, more than most free men could earn in a whole year. By 978, King Ethelred took the throne of England, and his very first decree dealt with Viking slave trading, not to ban it, but to tax it. Customs records from London show duties collected on human cargo, 5 silver pieces for a woman, 2 for a child. The English weren't shocked by what the Norse did. Nope. They envied the profits and wanted a piece. Maritime archaeology gives more scoop. Wrecks pulled from the North Sea show specially designed holds, ventilation shafts for air, water stores for weeks of sailing, reinforced compartments built not for cargo, but for people. These weren't quick slave ships, they were purpose-built. The biggest one found so far could carry 80 captives below deck, and timber dating puts its build around 912. Burn marks show it sank at sea, with 80 women chained inside dying with it. And yet, some women refused to stay victims. Oh yes, they fought back. In 923, Frankish records mention a woman named Gunhild, a freed Norse captive who turned the raiders' own tricks against them.
She knew their tactics, their weak spots, their fears, and for 7 years, she led warbands across Frankish lands, smashing Viking outposts and freeing hundreds of captives. The chronicles give her credit for wrecking 12 Viking camps. Her methods were tough: surprise attacks, no prisoners, no mercy. Her last recorded raid hit the slave market at Rouen, and contemporary accounts describe the systematic execution of every traitor she found there. 47 Viking men died. The punishment was always the same: castration first, then death by blood loss. After 930, Gunhild vanishes from the written record, but burn layers found in Viking sites along the Seine date from that exact time. Someone was hunting Vikings, someone who knew exactly how to break them. The practice of seizing defeated women didn't end with the Vikings, it spread. Norman chronicles from the 11th century.
Hey, let's keep the gossip rolling about the Vikings. And guess what? The same custom popped up in conquered England. When William's knights got land grants, the lists included not just cows and grain, but women too. The Domesday Book lays it out plain and simple. Female dependents were counted right alongside cattle and plows. Women were marked as property, valuable but easy to replace. Archaeological finds from Norman castles show how it worked. Courtyards often had holding cells just for women, with stone walls, iron doors, and no windows. Some could hold 30 captives at once. Bones in castle rubbish heaps tell the rest. Infant death rates were nearly 100%, and these weren't accidents. Oh no, this was a deliberate choice. The kids born from forced unions carried signs of rape, so they were seen as a problem and got eliminated. In 1066, the Norman conquest hit when Harold Godwinson fell at Hastings, and England changed hands. But the new bosses followed the same tricks the Vikings started. Saxon women were grabbed and married off to Norman knights. Marriage was the legal trick that turned rape into something legit. Chroniclers back then called it civilizing the Saxon bloodline, but today we'd call it something else entirely: ethnic cleansing through sexual violence. Medieval marriage contracts show the money side. Saxon heirs brought high prices, not for love or family ties, but because their lands could be sucked into Norman control. Women's consent didn't matter. Their bodies were just tools to move property. Church records spilled the tea on the resistance. Some women said no and chose death. Others ran to convents, and the number of nuns in England tripled in the decade after Hastings. Noble women's suicide rates shot up, and the church turned many into martyrs, while the state just saw them as lost property. The strongest proof doesn't come from old stories, but from science. Genetic studies of today's people show patterns that match the Viking slaving and Norman conquest roots. Mitochondrial DNA passed from moms to kids tells the tale. Celtic and Saxon female lines pop up in Scandinavian gene pools starting in the 9th century. This wasn't some cultural swap or migration. Nope, it was rape happening over generations on a huge scale. In Iceland today, about 60% of female ancestry traces back to Celtic women taken as captives, and in Norway, around 40% comes from women from the British Isles. Behind those numbers are thousands of lives, thousands of women taken, pregnancies forced, and kids born who never knew their mom's real name. The scope was massive, the system was on purpose, and while chroniclers skip the evidence, bones and DNA keep the truth alive. But archaeology keeps digging up darker stuff. At Jorvik, modern York, a new find shocked historians. Excavations uncovered a building from around 876 with 64 individual cells and chains bolted into stone walls. Soil checks show the site was used for 40 years.
This wasn't a prison. Oh no, it was a breeding spot. The bones tell it all. Hundreds of women passed through those cells, all with signs of lots of pregnancies, all tossed out when they couldn't have kids anymore. The building sat right in the heart of York, not hidden, not secret, everyone knew. Church records back it up. Baptismal rolls list 732 births from that site, but only 12 kids lived past 5. The rest vanished, labeled as foundlings of unknown parentage, then sold into servitude. The profits went straight to church building projects, and medieval account books from Yorkminster even show regular payments to the facility's operators. Not bribes, not charity, but fees for services. The church wasn't just in the know, it was a partner. This pattern was everywhere, in Norse lands, in Norman spots. Every big town had similar setups. Every church kept similar records. The network was tight, the profits were huge, and the suffering was beyond words.
And at Repton, in that famous grave of Norse women, new soil core checks revealed one last horror. The grave wasn't from one massacre. Nope. Deeper layers show multiple burials over half a century. This wasn't a quick wipeout, it was repeated, planned, an ongoing policy of erasing women, their bodies, their voices, their whole existence. Generation after generation, Viking women were silenced, not just by chains, but by poison. Bone tests show mercury compounds given slowly, driving them mad before death. A mad woman's words carried no weight, wiping out their voices forever. Excavations at Repton show mom-child burials, families killed together to leave no witnesses. These weren't random hits, they were targeted takedowns. Women who'd seen too much, women who knew the captivity machine from the inside. And among the skulls, one had a final inscription in Old Norse, "Better this way," a last excuse carved by hands that knew exactly what awaited captured wives.